In a world that worshipped perfection, Janice Dickinson was born wrong, too loud, too dark, too different. Brooklyn blood ran through her veins, but her eyes were already fixed on the lights beyond the horizon. Her childhood was not a fairy tale, it was survival in a home where love had conditions and silence was safer than truth. She learned early that beauty could be armor, and that attention, even cruel attention, was a kind of safety. When she entered the modeling world, she walked straight into a fortress built for others, blondes with porcelain skin, quiet smiles, and carefully packaged femininity. The agencies looked at her and said, "You're not our type." They meant, "You're too ethnic, too fierce, too much." But rejection didn't break her, it ignited her. Janice wasn't born to fit into a frame, she was made to shatter it. And so she did. With a one-way ticket and nothing but stubborn ambition, she flew to Paris. The city of light met her hunger with indifference, but her fire was impossible to ignore. She pushed into castings, forced photographers to see her angles, her defiance, her danger. Paris loved rebellion and Janice became its new muse. Soon, she was walking for Yves Saint Laurent, Versace, Valentino. The girl they once dismissed was suddenly rewriting beauty itself. Her face was everywhere, raw, sharp, unforgettable. Richard Avedon, Helmut Newton, the legends wanted her, not because she was perfect, but because she was real. But beneath the magazine covers, there was always a storm. Janice wasn't chasing fame, she was running from invisibility. Every photo shoot, every runway strut was a scream that said, "See me. Believe me. Don't erase me." By the time America caught up, she had already become something the industry didn't yet have a word for: a supermodel. Before Cindy, before Naomi, before the era was even defined, Janice was already living it. And yet, when the story of the supermodel was later written, her name was quietly pushed to the margins. But Janice never belonged to silence. She was the woman who refused to disappear, even when the world tried to delete her. This was just the beginning of a life lived in extremes, brilliance and chaos, fame and fallout. The rise of Janice Dickinson wasn't just about modeling. It was about rebellion. It was about a woman who clawed her way out of darkness, stood in the center of the flashbulbs, and declared, "I am the first supermodel." And for a moment, just a moment, the world finally listened. Paris had given her wings, but fame gave her fire. Janice Dickinson was no longer the girl begging to be seen. She was the woman the camera could not look away from. Every runway was her battlefield. Every photo a declaration. She didn't just model clothes, she consumed them. Her walk wasn't graceful, it was violent, defiant, alive. She was the woman photographers waited hours for, not because she was polite, but because she was unpredictable. She could turn a tired shoot into something electric, something dangerous. A cigarette in one hand, chaos in her eyes, she was beauty with a pulse. By the early 1980s, Janice was living in the center of the storm she created. Fame had its own gravity, and it pulled her into a world drenched in neon lights, champagne, and cocaine. The supermodel era was dawning, glossy covers, private jets, front-row fame. But for Janice, it wasn't glamour, it was survival dressed in silk. She learned how to laugh louder than her pain, how to dance faster than her doubt. She partied with rock stars, argued with designers, and woke up in hotel rooms that smelled like perfume and regret. The tabloids called her wild. But wild was just another word for free. There was no handbook for what she was becoming. The fashion world had never seen a woman like her, outspoken, sexual, aggressive, unashamed. She didn't bow to the male photographers who tried to control her. She didn't smile when told to tone it down. Janice didn't care about likability. She cared about legacy. And yet, as the new generation of models began to rise, Naomi, Linda, Cindy, Christy, the industry's narrative started shifting. The term supermodel was born, but Janice, the self-proclaimed first, was quietly cut out of the frame. She had paved the runway they walked on, yet found herself watching from the sidelines. Still, she refused to fade. In interviews, she said it boldly, "I'm the first supermodel." Some laughed, some rolled their eyes, but beneath her bravado was heartbreak. Because what she was really saying was, "Don't forget me." Behind the glitter and the headlines was a woman slowly unraveling, a creature made for attention, now terrified of disappearing. The drugs dulled the fear. The parties drowned the silence. The men, the actors, the musicians filled the emptiness, at least for a night. Fame had been her escape. Now it was her addiction. Janice Dickinson had conquered the world of beauty by refusing to play by its rules. But the higher she climbed, the thinner the air became, and soon, she would find herself gasping for breath. The next chapter of her story wouldn't be about triumph. It would be about survival. And the fall from the top would be as spectacular and as devastating as the rise that came before it. At the height of her fame, Janice Dickinson looked untouchable, a goddess framed in silver light, her face carved into every magazine, her name whispered in every studio. But behind those perfect images, the cracks were spreading. The woman who once controlled every room was slowly losing control of herself. The nights grew longer. The lines of cocaine sharper. The laughter more desperate. Fashion had given her everything and quietly taken it all back. Each photoshoot felt emptier, each applause fainter. The world that once chased her now had newer faces, younger muses, cleaner reputations. Janice began to chase the high that fame had once given her. If the industry wouldn't worship her, the drugs would numb her. If love wouldn't stay, the chaos would. She fell into a rhythm of destruction, parties that never ended, men who never cared, mornings that came too soon. She called it living. But it was survival on borrowed time. And then came the heartbreak that made headlines, the Stallone scandal. Sylvester Stallone, Hollywood's golden man, and Janice Dickinson, the model who couldn't be tamed. For a brief, burning moment, it was passion and promise. She believed he was the father of her child. She believed she had finally found something real. Until the DNA test shattered everything. Publicly. Brutally. It wasn't his baby. The tabloids devoured her pain. They painted her as reckless, deceitful, broken. The same world that once praised her beauty now mocked her downfall. And Janice, raw, furious, humiliated, spiraled deeper into addiction. In Los Angeles, she tried to rebuild herself among the wreckage. But Hollywood wasn't salvation. It was another trap. A city that promised redemption, but only delivered mirrors. Behind the scenes, she met men who wore success like armor and used power like a weapon. Promises turned into threats. Trust turned into trauma. She was no longer the woman choosing the flashbulbs, she was the woman being blinded by them. And still, she didn't stop fighting. Even when her career faded, even when the calls stopped coming, Janice refused to disappear quietly. She would rather burn out than fade away. But the price of being unforgettable is that you never get to rest. She had survived her childhood, conquered fashion, endured humiliation, but now she faced her most dangerous enemy, herself. Every addiction has a root, every rebellion has a wound. For Janice, it was the same one she carried since she was a child, the ache to be loved without conditions. To be enough without a camera. By the late 1990s, the world had changed. The supermodel era was ending, and Janice Dickinson, the woman who had once defined it, was adrift, alone, and searching for her next reinvention. But fate wasn't done with her yet. She would rise again, louder, bolder, and more unapologetic than ever before. Because no matter how many times the world tried to bury her, Janice always came back, in heels, in fury, in truth. By the early 2000s, the supermodel who once ruled the runway was nearly forgotten. Janice Dickinson, once fire, once fame, was now a woman trying to survive in a world that had moved on without her. The lights were dimmer. The calls fewer. But Janice had never known how to stay quiet. When America's Next Top Model came calling, it wasn't just a television job. It was resurrection. A second act in a world that only loved firsts. Janice didn't walk onto that set as a washed-up model. She walked in like a storm. Sharp tongue. Unfiltered truth. Brutal honesty wrapped in sequins. She wasn't the mentor people expected. She was the mirror they feared. And for millions watching, she was unforgettable. She told the truth about modeling, the pain behind the poses, the rejection behind the smiles. But reality TV thrives on villains, and Janice, with her chaos and candor, became exactly that. The editors loved her soundbites, but not her spirit. The network adored her drama, but not her defiance. She was back in the spotlight, but once again, she wasn't in control of the story. Still, Janice made an art of survival. After Top Model, she launched the Janice Dickinson Modeling Agency, her attempt to reclaim power in the very industry that had once broken her. It was messy, impulsive, chaotic, but it was hers. She wanted to create something real, something kinder than what she endured. Behind the scenes, the show revealed the same pattern that had defined her life: ambition colliding with self-destruction. Fights with producers, financial collapse, broken trust. Janice was brilliant and impossible all at once, a woman who wanted to lead, but couldn't always escape her own chaos. But through every failure, she remained brutally, painfully honest. When others hid behind perfect PR, she told her truth about addiction, about aging, about being discarded by the very machine she helped build. Hollywood didn't know what to do with a woman who refused to apologize. The world loved her when she was young, wild, and sexy, but not when she was loud, scarred, and real. Still, Janice never learned how to be silent. Every interview, every appearance, she pushed back against erasure. She said the things other women whispered. She made people uncomfortable, and that was her power. But that same defiance would soon bring her face to face with something darker than any scandal she had survived before. Because in an industry built on secrets, Janice was about to expose one that shook the world. The next chapter wouldn't be about fashion, fame, or redemption. It would be about truth, raw, painful, and long denied. For most of her life, Janice Dickinson's battles had been public: addiction, betrayal, humiliation, all captured in glossy headlines and flashing lights. But the darkest wound she carried was one the cameras never saw. It began in the 1980s, during the height of her fame, a night she had buried for decades, hidden under layers of denial and survival. A name the world adored: Bill Cosby. A man she had once trusted, admired, and feared. When Janice finally spoke, the world wasn't ready to listen. In 2014, she sat before cameras once again, older, sober, trembling, and said the words that would change everything: "Bill Cosby raped me." It was a moment of defiance, but also of pain, a confession born not from revenge, but from exhaustion. For years, she had carried that night in silence. Now, she wanted the truth to breathe. But the world, as always, punished women for their honesty. The backlash was vicious. Critics called her a liar. Headlines mocked her. Some dismissed her as the crazy model, the addict, the attention seeker. Her credibility was ripped apart, dissected, laughed at. And yet, she did not back down. Because Janice knew something the world kept forgetting: the truth doesn't need to be pretty to be real. Her words were raw, unpolished, painful, but they were hers. Years later, when dozens of women came forward with similar stories, the narrative began to shift. People started to believe her. Slowly. Reluctantly. And when Cosby was finally convicted, the world realized that Janice had been telling the truth all along. But vindication doesn't erase trauma. Even as she found justice in headlines, she still carried the invisible scars: the trust broken, the dignity stolen, the years lost to silence. In interviews, she spoke with a trembling strength, saying, "No one believed me then. But I kept talking anyway." That single sentence became the heartbeat of her story, not just about one man's crime, but about an entire culture that silenced women like her. The scandal that nearly destroyed her became her rebirth. Because for the first time, Janice wasn't being photographed or performed, she was being heard. Not as the loud model, not as the diva, not as the addict, but as a survivor. And in that truth, she found a kind of peace she had never known before. It wasn't the glamour of her youth, or the fame she once chased. It was quieter, deeper, truer. For decades, Janice Dickinson had been a symbol of beauty and rebellion. But now, she stood as something even stronger, a symbol of endurance. A reminder that no matter how many times the world tries to erase a woman's truth, it still finds a way to rise. Janice Dickinson had always lived at the extremes, a life measured in flashes, high heels, and heartbreak. She was the first to scream, the first to be seen, the first to refuse invisibility. And though the world tried to forget her, history refuses to erase those who leave scars on its surface. In her later years, Janice began to reflect. Not on magazine covers or runway triumphs, but on survival, on what it meant to be a woman who refused to compromise, even when compromise was safe. She saw the young models she had inspired, women of color, women with edges, women unafraid to claim space, and understood that her fight had never been just for herself. Motherhood became her anchor. Through her children, she discovered a softer kind of bravery, one not captured by a lens, one that required patience, forgiveness, and presence. Sobriety became her armor. Therapy became her mirror. And in quiet moments, she finally began to make peace with the chaos that had defined her life. The world had once celebrated her wildness, but punished her honesty. They applauded her beauty, but mocked her pain. They loved her glamour, but rejected her truth. Yet, Janice endured. And endurance, she realized, was its own kind of glory. Critics revisited her story. Historians, journalists, and fans began to place her in the rightful narrative of fashion history. She was recognized not only as a supermodel, but as a pioneer, a woman who broke boundaries, demanded visibility, and confronted an industry designed to silence her. Her mistakes, her scandals, her chaos, all of it became part of a larger story about fame, power, and resilience. Janice Dickinson's life is not a tale of perfection. It is a tale of survival, defiance, and unapologetic existence. It is a reminder that being unforgettable comes at a cost. It is a testament that strength is often forged in the fires of trauma, rejection, and betrayal. And in the final frame of her story, she remains vivid. Not just in the memory of magazines and runways, but in the hearts of those who witnessed her truth loud, raw, and impossible to ignore. Janice declared, "I am the first supermodel, and history may argue with her claim. But history cannot deny her impact, her courage, her voice." She lived as she always would, boldly, unflinchingly, and without apology. The woman who refused to disappear quietly had become more than a model, more than a scandal, more than a headline. She became a symbol, the loud woman who would not be erased, the survivor who turned pain into power, the legend who defined an era and demanded to be remembered. And as the cameras finally dimmed, her story lingered, ablaze in a world that too often prefers shadows.